Well, the introduction of more boots on the ground to tackle crime means nothing if the people are not properly trained, they're lawful, and of course, most importantly, they are accountable. And that's according to the Good Party, which is calling for police and justice ministers to regulate crime structures such as Gauteng crime prevention wardens. They've been out and about. That's just one province. The other is Cape Town's law enforcement advancement plan. Well, Good Party is saying the structures are carrying out their work illegally. Well, let's find out why that's the case. Joining me this evening from the Good Party is Brett Herron. Hello to you, Brett. And why is this illegal? I got the sense that all of this was above board, all the planning was in place, but you're saying it's not quite above board. Why is that? Good evening.
Good evening, Gareth. The South African security forces, which includes policing, is structured in terms of our constitution and then any legislation that is constitutionally compliant. And in order to be a crime prevention warden with peacekeeping or peace officer powers, as the Gauteng Premier is claiming that the crime prevention wardens have, that needs to take place in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act. So I asked the Minister of Justice whether the crime prevention wardens in Gauteng have peacekeeping powers in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, and his reply to my question in Parliament was no, they don't. So if they don't fall under any peacekeeping powers in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, they're not a police force in terms of the Police Act, because only the South African police services and municipalities can establish police structures. Then they are basically vigilantes. Now, we can understand that communities want to see boots on the ground, but undertrained crime prevention wardens who have no peacekeeping powers can actually be more dangerous than they can do any crime fighting.
I would contend that it would have been more worthwhile for the SAPS to rather get these crime wardens in both provinces, Brett, trained up as actual SAPS and put on the ground as men and women in blue and boost our police force. Would that be a fair assessment from my behalf?
I would agree with you that, look, obviously communities are crying out for more boots on the ground, even though policing itself will never address crime. We have to address the socioeconomic conditions that are prevalent in these crime-ridden areas. But having crime prevention officers or law enforcement officers who don't have the proper policing powers, in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, says that whatever they do is of no force or effect.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we see the Gauteng government bragging about the interventions that the CPWs have undertaken, but in terms of the law, none of that has got any legal force or effect if you read the Criminal Procedure Act. So really, we need those structures to be properly regulated, and part of that discussion is about whether some policing power should be devolved to provinces or local government, because communities clearly want policing, but we cannot have unregulated illegal officers wandering the streets, also undertrained in terms of police training compared to what SAPS goes through. So I would have expected the provinces to invest in extra SAPS police officers on the ground.
The concern for me as well, and again, you can tell me if you disagree or agree, Brett, is it's one thing to have more boots on the ground. The issue we have in this country is convictions in courts in our country. Lots of arrests, lots of investigations, very little convictions. And often this comes down to technicalities where procedures have not been followed. I'm not getting the sense from what you're saying that these CPWs will stand up in court. And that's a big concern for me.
It's a very big concern for me, and that's why I'm raising this issue, because anyone who does anything pretending to have or believing they have peacekeeping powers, peace officer powers, which are the policing powers that Metropolitan Police use, for example, and they don't actually have those powers. In terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, whatever they did has no force or effect. Those are the exact words of the Criminal Procedure Act. And so, to some extent, these peacekeepers or the peace officers or extra policing units that have no actual structure within our policing system and have no powers in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act, can contaminate crime scenes and can actually undermine prosecutions and convictions. And so while we have a very low level of prosecutions and convictions compared to policing complaints, these boots on the ground are going to complicate matters further because they can undermine a prosecution if they effect an arrest without actually having the powers to do so.
Yeah, one could imagine what would happen if you were to contaminate a crime scene as well. If you don't know how to manage yourself around a crime scene, we know how badly that can go. I just want to find out, before I ask you about what you're suggesting is the way forward, Brett, I'll get there in a moment. I want to ask you this. I always get the sense when we're in the build-up to an election year, national elections 2024 as well, that what the Western Cape government and Gauteng government are doing is simply a facade. Or really just it's window dressing at this point?
Well, it's definitely politically motivated, in my view, because the amount of money and the great lengths that both governments have gone to create the illusion of policing, when there is no real policing taking place because the units are not properly trained and they're also not properly established in terms of the law. So it is, in my view, a response to an election year that is on the horizon, that motivation is extremely dangerous because we're putting young people who are undertrained in crime-ridden areas, and they're putting themselves at danger, and they're putting those communities at danger, and they're creating an illusion that things are safer in those environments when they're not safer.
So how do we begin to fix this? Let's draw back the curtains on the facade, on the illusion. What would the good party like to see? Because the budgets are there. They've been approved. There was a massive parade. They got the fancy cars and helicopters. They're out there doing it. What do we do to try and legitimize this? I use the word legitimize very loosely in this case because they're legal. They just don't seem to be very effective, according to you. How do we fix this?
Well, they're not legal. They're actually illegal until such time as the Minister of Justice gives them peace officer powers.
Right.
Or in case of the Gauteng situation, until they're integrated into a metropolitan or a municipal police service. Because in terms of the Constitution and the Police Act, provinces have no policing powers. So what Gauteng chain of command is very unclear to me, and so they are operating unlawfully. But the solution really is for the Minister of Police and the Minister of Justice and national government to look at two provinces who are implementing policing, probably because they are responding politically to pressures for better crime fighting, and they don't have much confidence in SAPS, or they're losing confidence in SAPS. And so the ministers and the national government really need to decide whether they can increase the policing capacity and the quality of policing themselves, or whether they should devolve some of those functions to provinces or to the municipal policing services if they are able to do the job better. But we cannot have these rogue units operating without regulation. So the solution from our perspective is to consider what parts of policing should be devolved, and for that to happen in order for these policing units to have the powers that communities are expecting them to have.
Yeah, I suspect one day there's going to be a bigger discussion I'd like to have with experts in the field. At the moment, SAPS can't handle the situation. We simply bring in the SANDF, but that's a discussion for another night. Brett Herron, thank you very much indeed for making time for us this evening. You agree with Brett from the Good Party? Well, you're welcome to get hold of us at eNCA. You feel like he's got a point. There's not enough being done as far as ensuring that these police wardens, these peace wardens, safety wardens, there's so many titles going around at the moment as to what they actually are, both Western Cape and Gauteng. Are they effective? Do you feel they can get the job done? Brett Herron making the point that if this was to get to court and it's not legal, I can assure you, no convictions are going to take place.